AKR here of D&D Homebrew, talking today about whether or not wizards suck, as it were, or have become much less powerful, let's just say, less interesting, less worthy of a character class in games like 5e and Pathfinder 2e, as opposed to the games in the lineage of D&D. Not necessarily talking about other systems or that are outside of that lineage. I'm talking strictly in the D&D world. And, part of this came from on our podcast I do, Masters and Treasure, with Dan Norton of Bandit's Keep. We talked about the thing where wizards memorizing spells as opposed to spontaneous casters that you have, whether this is a hindrance. And I'm playing in a Castles and Crusades campaign right now where they have all sorts of optional rules in that, the books, the DM guide and whatnot. Kind of like I like that system where they say, well, you can use a mana point system. Wizards can memorize their spells, but then use mana points to take whatever number of those memorized spells they want. But it got me thinking about the decline of the wizard generally as a character class that people take. I've noticed this because I used to really like magic users, as we called them in the old days. And I played wizards in 3.5 a lot, and I've played them in Pathfinder 2e, but I don't see people playing them in 5e very much or in Pathfinder. And I think what's happened is the era of the wizard as a glass cannon, right? They get more and more powerful. They get these deadly spells. They still, when we started off in the AD&D, original days, OD&D, 1 4-sided die. And you could have a 1. In fact, a lot of times, if you had a low con or something, you always had that 1. I mean, it was, again, people came up with systems. You could take a half if you wanted or try to roll for it and all this and that. Those 4-sided die made you very vulnerable and no armor. So, I mean, this is well known, but the trade-off was as you went up in level, starting at that 5th level with the 3rd level spells and on, you started to get really nice spells. And by the end, the high levels, 12th, 13th, I mean, you weren't a god, but you were very powerful, as opposed to the classic fighter, cleric, rogue, or as we said, thief in those days, character classes, or, they had some other ones, paladins or whatever. Again, those were hard to get. There were the druids and there were bards, but, the wizard, the magic user / wizard of 3.5 and early Pathfinder, deadly. Then things changed. In 5e, of course, bounded accuracy meant that saves, DCs for spells, didn't go up such a level. Monsters, as you went up high level, started to get legendary resistances, just deciding to make saving throws. You had situations with concentration, having to concentrate on certain spells, powerful spells, and you couldn't just, throw a haste, throw a fly, throw an invisibility, do all these things that you could in the old days. There were all these spells that used to just be you threw that at a creature that it affected until it was dispelled, or you dispelled it, or had much longer durations. And all of this affected the wizard magic user class to make them not as desirable to run. And the other thing that happened was the proliferation of classes, and the proliferation of classes like martial classes, for example, that could use magic. Your Eldritch Knight, your Rune Knight, you got your Arcane Trickster in the rogue category, Psi Warrior, not to mention the spontaneous spellcasters like the Bard, like the Warlock or Sorcerer, that, yes, they get less spells, but they just have their set, the ones they know, and they can throw them as they want. And I know in 5e, you memorize those and then you can move them around or whatever. But it still isn't the same, power level as those character classes get, even if it's in a limited range. And people talk about the fact that wizards have ritual spells that they can use, which is true. And there are some, Liamud's Tiny Hut is a prime example that some people say is a broken spell. People are always trying to figure out ways around it or whatever. So, but again, if ritual casting is not the same as being in the moment, whether it's exploration, turning into something that's, affecting the party, much less in a combat situation. You're not going to be using those ritual spells. And in Pathfinder was a similar situation, reducing the number of spells wizards have, scaling back on the saves, the DCs of those spells, and turning it into, you had to specialize in some high-level abilities when you got to higher levels. So you still got deadly, but it just wasn't the same as it was in 3.5 or Pathfinder 1E. And I think this points to the fact that what is emphasized in, let's say, modern D&D style systems is specialization and flexibility as opposed to just a general breadth. So the utility spells of the wizard, there are options and combos that a lot of the, spontaneous spellcasters have that, render those not as useful. And then, of course, you have the bard, because the bard is the jack of all trades. Having run one in a long time in a 5e campaign, it's a very good character class, because it combines a lot of different things, and you can do stuff. Or there's the warlock that can get some wizard spells in their repertoire. I mean, again, when you look at these classes and some of the things they can do, and the way people tend to play D&D, as just that, not just generic, but that style of game, the wizard kind of loses out, because all those utility spells is kind of what the bard can do, but also the druid has those kind of spells as well. And they have some more interesting things. The shape change ability, of course, I would say nerfed a little bit. But anyway, they're a more interesting character for most people to play than the wizard. And you have certain cleric classes, let's say the light cleric, who has all sorts of offensive spells. And, there's different permutations, obviously. It just become more useful to a group. And when I'm saying useful with sneer marks, because I kind of dislike that. What is useful depends on the style of play and what comes into use. But for a lot of people, a light cleric, a high-level light cleric, is way more useful to their group than a higher-level wizard, because they've got heals up the wazoo. So our wizards, going to be relegated to the trash heap because I don't see people playing them very much, right? I think the wizard, if you're going in, again, this is a 5e thing or Pathfinder, again, the OSR world, of course, they have the glass cannon type approach, right? Where they're really weak at the beginning, really deadly at the end. And if that's the way you like to do it, go for it. But I think if you're playing in a modern, D&D style game, I still like to play wizards. I played one in a Pathfinder 2e campaign, and I had a great time. And what did I do? Well, I had, first of all, in 5e, the ritual casting. But I had my breadth of spells, and I would talk about, I'm going to take this and this today. And what did this do? It stimulated creative solutions and creative planning for our group. When I would say, okay, I can take this and I can take this. How are we going to approach this? Whatever. And the people, the spontaneous spellcasters and whatnot that had the very limited offensive, typically spell list or whatever, I had more interesting things to do. And again, the way I play is to think about creative solutions all the time, creative ideas. The other thing is, at the end of that campaign, I think it was 11th level, and I was pretty powerful. I was, I had some abilities, and I could see what was coming. So, the wizard at those levels, you got some firepower there. And you've got all sorts of feats and all sorts of things that make you, this is, again, Pathfinder 2e. But it's a long way to that level. You've got to play that character, and if you don't have a bard in your party, or you don't have a druid or something, you are useful to have all those utility spells, but you got to be into that. You're not playing to just get to the point where you're just this god doing time stops, altered reality and everything. And again, I'm not saying like banishment in 5e or force cage or all these spells super high level aren't useful. I mean, aren't deadly, I should say. But how often do you get there? Because I think the focus has shifted to everybody needs to be awesome all the time and at first level. And then at 15th and 17th, whatever it is, and the wizard isn't the one that just becomes this unbelievable figure that started off as this weak person kind of running around, but they were really good, arcane information, whatever. All of a sudden at the end, they're like the gods, Gandalf, who again supposedly was like a 5th level wizard in the old system, whether that's true or not, he was as powerful, more powerful than any individual in that world. There were other wizards that were powerful and demons and whatnot, but nobody else is going to fight a Balrog, but Gandalf did. Well, those days are done. Those days are done in terms of the leveling of the playing field. And so if you're going to play a wizard, which I still enjoy, I still like playing them, you got to think about how am I going to optimize what I have, whether it's ritual casting, whether it's the breadth of my spells, whether it's the skill involved in writing down those spells beforehand and shaping how your party is operating. And you're not just sitting there with the same list and just whenever it comes up, like with the spontaneous spellcasters. And you may find that makes your wizard a way more interesting character in relation to the other players in your game. Quick shout out to my Patreon supporters. I just did this Hollow Tree single room dungeon. Very fun. Love to hear your opinion on this. Do you think wizards suck now in the more modern D&D systems? Or you think, no, they're just as good or just indifferent? I don't know who plays them anymore, so that's a good question. Give a comment, like the video, subscribe. Always want more subscribers. Most importantly, keep playing an RPG game. Maybe play a wizard and tell somebody else about it.